Good morning. Now, a few years ago, one of my good friends gave me this book. I don't know if you can see that, but it's called New Hope for Your Hair. And I don't know quite what that says about what he thought of my hair, but it's been on my shelf ever since, to the amusement of some people. There's a great chapter at the end of this book. It's called Transformations. It holds out the hope of new hope for your hair, and at the very end it gets to the transformations. But it's quite a big book, and to get to the chapter Transformations, you've got to wade through quite a lot of other stuff. I think it might have been better if they'd talked a bit more about the transformations at the start before then explaining the journey. There isn't even a picture on the cover. Now, we're familiar with that idea of people showing us the end product, which might be some way off. That's how packets of seeds are sold. If you've ever seen or bought some seeds, they don't show you a photo of the seeds on the packet. They show you the lettuce or the flowers or whatever you will get at the end when they have grown. That's why when you buy some food, often it'll have a picture of what they say is a serving suggestion, but it's the food cooked and prepared beautifully, isn't it? It's the end product. It might not look exactly like that when you get out of the packet. You might think, oh goodness, what have I got? Sometimes when we see a trailer for a film, we might go and see the film and think, they managed to get all of the best bits in the film into that trailer. There wasn't a lot else beyond. Well, why am I talking about this? Well, we're starting a new series this morning that helps us to think about our broken world and what God has done about it. And I just wanted to tell you a little bit about how we're going to do that. We're actually going to start at the very end. We're going to see the big sweep of what the Bible says about what God has done in the world. And we're going to actually start at the end. So we've already had our reading from Revelation, the very end of the Bible. And we're going to see what God says about the end. And then in a couple of weeks' time, we'll be back at the beginning. We'll see what went wrong. And we're going to see what God has done. So it's, if you like, the story of the Bible, but it's also the story of human history. It's about new hope, but not new hope for your hair. It's about a new hope for our broken world. And so I hope you'll come with us on this journey over the next few weeks as we think about the way that we're longing for a world that's not broken. Now, I have an interesting question to think about. How would you change the world? Perhaps there's certain food you enjoy and you would love to have plenty of it. Perhaps there's some sport that you enjoy watching or playing and you would love that to be everywhere. Maybe you've got some things that you don't like and you would like to get rid of. Maybe you would stop music being played in elevators or some other pet hate that you have. Now here's the thing, your preference might not be mine, so your ideal world might be quite different to my ideal world. So I might love music in elevators, or your idea of the best food to serve everyone might be my idea of terrible food, etc., etc. There's so many different preferences we have, but there would be many common ideas that we'd have if we thought about our broken world and some of the serious things that go on in the world. I think we'd all have some common hopes and dreams for the world. Tim Chester, the Christian author, puts it this way. He says, a world in which there's no sickness, no sorrow, and no death. Isn't it a world, wouldn't we want a world where there's no poverty and no drought, no destruction or devastation? Wouldn't we want a world where everyone has more than enough food and where there's more than enough water to go around? A world in which we can all enjoy ourselves, that great thing of reach our full potential. It's a place where we don't grow old and frail. We don't have to cope with failing memories and failing bodies, where we never lose those we love, and where we're never hurt by others or ourselves hurt others. I wonder if you would agree with Tim Chester on that. I think most of us probably would. Now, earlier we heard a section of the Bible read, and it's from the final book in the Bible, the book of Revelation. It's a section that looks ahead. In chapter 2, verse 1, it said this: "Then the angel showed me the river of the water of life, as clear as crystal, flowing from the throne of God and of the Lamb, down the middle of the great street of the city. On each side of the river stood the tree of life, bearing crops of fruit, yielding its fruit every month. And the leaves of the tree are for the healing of the nations. No longer will there be any curse." I wonder what you made of that. God is on the throne, things are put right, and it's a picture of tremendous blessing and bounty, crops that come 12 times a year, and healing for whole nations. A tremendous picture, a wonderful picture. In the previous chapter, chapter 21, it also talks about this time. It puts it like this. It says, "He, God, will wipe away every tear from their eyes, and there will be no more death, or mourning, or crying, or pain, for the old order of things has passed away." A tremendous picture of the future. And history has actually seen many human attempts to fix our broken world. Economic systems have been tried, political movements have come and gone, and even if you just look at the last 100 years, there are many isms: capitalism, socialism, fascism, communism. They've all promised much, but they cannot deliver this world that's no longer broken. Some promise to, or hope to, or attempt to, but all disappoint. There's been many attempts right down through history. Well, I've got two big ideas for us this morning. The first thing to see is we're going to see, I hope, a promise from God. And what's the promise? Well, it's a promise from God of a world not broken. Now, you might be surprised to hear that in my life, I have seen Angela Merkel, that's the German Chancellor, I have seen Angela Merkel 4 times in person over a 10-year period, but in my whole life, I've never seen a British Prime Minister even once. Now, I know that sounds unlikely, particularly because I've lived most of my life in Cumbria, but it really is true. Honestly, it really is. I've seen Angela Merkel 4 times. If you really want to stress something when you're talking to people, you might say, no, honestly, it really is true, like I just did then. And it really is true. You might say, I really did see what I said, or it really did happen, or it really will happen, if we're talking about something in the future. Now, something similar is happening in this section of Revelation. I've said that there's a promise from God, and actually we see it here, a promise from God. We see it in the Revelation 21 section. It's in verse 5. It says this: "He who was seated on the throne said, 'I'm making everything new.' Then he said, 'Write this down, for these words are trustworthy and true.'" That's a bit like saying, no, it really did happen. Or in the section that was read for us earlier, chapter 22, verse 6, "The angel said to me, 'These words are trustworthy and true.'" It's the same way of emphasizing it. But we might think, well, that's all very well that is emphasized there. It's saying, you know, it really is trustworthy and true. But come on, isn't this just wishful thinking? I mean, we'd love to believe it was true, you know, the abundance that Revelation talks about, no more tears and things like that as well. But we know how the world works. We know that isn't the world we live in. in fact, we live in a broken world. I don't know if you can see this, but on this world there's a lot of sticking plasters, and they have different things written on there: war and famine, tears, even COVID-19. We know, don't we, the grim reality of illness, of fear, of heartache, of loss. But before we dismiss what Revelation says as just wishful thinking, there's a second thing to know about what the Bible says. The Bible says there was a time when we got a glimpse of this world not broken. Not as a future promise, but as a time in history. Now, in the book of Mark, which is in the New Testament in the Bible, the writer Mark records for us various amazing events. Mark chapter 5 tells the story of a man coming to Jesus whose daughter is seriously ill. On the way to go and see the seriously ill daughter, Jesus is stopped by a woman who also needs help. It's a remarkable story. The woman has been seriously ill for a long time, and nobody has been able to help her. Mark 5 puts it this way: and a woman was there who had been subject to bleeding for 12 years. So she had some sort of illness that resulted in continuous bleeding. Maybe that illness where your blood doesn't clot and you just keep bleeding. But she had suffered, it said, a great deal under the care of many doctors, and she spent all she had, yet instead of getting better, she grew worse. And we read a little later in that section what happens when she comes to Jesus. She's been ill all this time. She's been unable to find anyone that can help her, and she comes and she doesn't actually even speak to Jesus. She simply touches him. And verse 29 says this: immediately her bleeding stopped, and she felt in her body that she was freed from her suffering. Remarkable, miraculous, in the true sense of the word, miraculous recovery. And a tremendous sort of uplifting moment in the story. But the story is an absolute roller coaster, because you might remember that I mentioned that there was a man whose daughter was seriously ill. Jesus is on the way to see that little girl, and there's a real twist in the story. It really takes a downturn immediately again. Verse 35, it says, while Jesus was still speaking, some people came from the house of Jairus, that's the name of the man. He was the synagogue leader. They said, your daughter is dead. Why bother the teacher anymore? Do you get what's happened? It's too late now. The little girl is dead. The man has come to Jesus, said, please, can you come and see her? Maybe you can help. On the way, there's been this little delay with this woman who had this terrible illness, and she's been healed. But now the little girl is dead. Do you see what I mean about it being a roller coaster? There's highs and lows in this story. The story in Mark 5 continues in verse 38. It says, when they came to the home of the synagogue leader, Jesus saw a commotion with people crying and wailing loudly. He went in and he said to them, why all this commotion and wailing? The child is not dead, but asleep. But they laughed at him. Of course they did. They didn't understand what was happening. Verse 40 continues. After he put them all out, he took the child's father and mother and the disciples who were with him, and he went in where the child was. He took her by the hand and said to her, Talitha cum, which means, little girl, I say to you, get up. Immediately the girl stood up and began to walk around. She was 12 years old. And at this, they were completely astonished. I mean, it's not surprising that it says they were completely astonished. Now, in Revelation, that last book of the Bible that we were just looking at earlier, we read about a world with no more death or mourning or crying or pain. That was in chapter 21 and verse 4. Well, here it is. The young girl is brought back from death. The mourning and the crying stops. Now, that is just a remarkable thing, isn't it? Just allow that to sink in. We've been very aware of illness and the possibility of death over recent months, haven't we? But it's of course always with us, and we, not many of us, won't have been touched by the great sadness that brings. Now, I wonder if you've ever been where somebody is cooking a fabulous meal. Perhaps you've been in the kitchen, the aromas were wafting through the house perhaps, and you've been drawn to the kitchen, and somebody's cooking something, maybe somebody that you know is a fabulous cook, and we have one or two of those in our church family. Maybe you have some in your family, or you know someone who's a great cook. The smells come to you, you wander into the kitchen, and there's a big pot bubbling on the stove, and you maybe get a spoon and just try a little bit, make sure you don't burn yourself and blow it, have a taste, because you can't wait for what is cooking there. You can't wait for the actual meal. You just got to have a taste there and then. It smells so good. You might get your wrist slapped if the cook is about though. But just a little taste of what's to come. Now, actually, that is what is happening here in Mark 5. It's a little glimpse of the world that God promises, the world that Revelation was looking ahead to. The very world that talks of, the events of Mark show us. Events that make us realize that the promises of Revelation 21 and 22 are very possible. They're actually within God's ability to deliver. How do we know? Well, because we see Jesus doing the very things that are promised, fixing a broken world. It isn't just a dream or wishful thinking, but it's a promise from God, and He's given us a glimpse, a foretaste, if you like, of how it's possible. And it's all linked to His Son Jesus. Now, over the coming weeks, we're going to be thinking about this broken world. We're going to be thinking about what God has done about it. I hope you were able to stay with us for the next few weeks and to see that together. And next week, we're going to be diving a little bit deeper into into the insight that Jesus gives us into how God can fix the broken world. And we're going to see a little bit more of this foretaste. So I hope you can join us then, and I hope together we can explore not just what has gone wrong with the world, but importantly what God has done to fix it. Now it's time for us to sing, and we are going to turn to song now.